Here's the written content for part 1. I thought I was the glue word count 800. I had just finished a 14-hour shift at Brooklyn General, and I could barely feel my legs. My shoes were soaked from a morning spill, and my scrubs clung to me like they were part of my skin. As I stepped out onto the street, the city felt quiet, almost too still for New York, and I found myself craving something simple. Just one person to ask if I was okay. The train ride home was half empty, like the world hadn't started spinning yet. I closed my eyes for most of it, replaying my last patient's voice in my head, not because I had to, but because that voice felt more real than the ones I usually hear at home. When I reached my stop, I didn't rush. My apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up, nothing special, but it was mine. I had one window facing the alley and a tiny shelf where I kept old books I'd read 3 times. I liked how still it was. I liked that I could leave something on the table and it would still be there when I came back. Sometimes I told myself I chose this quiet, but deep down I knew it was just the only place where I wasn't constantly needed. At my mom's place, I was never Emily. I was dinner. I was the bill payer. I was the cleaner. If something broke, I fixed it. If Ryan messed up again, I made excuses for him. Ryan's 22, studying something he doesn't care about, and always finding new ways to avoid growing up. My mom, she just lets him. She says I'm lucky to have a job and a reliable nature. That's what she calls it, reliable, like I'm a household appliance that never breaks. I don't remember the last time my mother asked how I was doing without following it with a request. Her calls always start with a question that sounds sweet until you hear what comes next. Can you stop by and fix the AC? Can you transfer a bit to Ryan's account? Can you come early and help set the table? And somehow, I always say, yes. The only person who ever asked about me just to ask was my dad, Robert. My dad. He left when I was 13. I never fully understood why. Just that one day he wasn't there, and the next, he sent a postcard from Seattle with a tiny sketch of the Space Needle. Since then, he's lived on the West Coast. New city every couple of years. Still sends postcards, still calls once in a while, always says the same thing at the end. Don't forget to take care of yourself, Em. I think he knows I forget. We don't talk often, but when we do, I feel like I can breathe without explaining myself. He was the only one who didn't get angry when I dropped out of med school. He said nurses are the ones who actually fight on the front lines. That's what he called it, fighting. Back home, they said I settled. I placed my keys on the hook and slid off my shoes, letting them drop with a thud on the wood floor. The quiet wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't ask for. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and stared at the fridge. There were 2 magnets holding up a thank you card from a patient and an old photo of me and my dad at Coney Island. I must have been 10. He was holding my hand and I was laughing. I can't remember the last time I laughed like that. These days, I mostly smile with my mouth and hope no one looks too closely at my eyes. I turned my phone face down, ignoring the 3 unread messages. I knew they were from Mom, probably reminding me to pick up something for the weekend. Ryan had some new girlfriend she wanted to impress, which usually meant I'd be cooking. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. Just for a second. I didn't fall asleep, not really. I just drifted into that space between dreams and memory where everything feels like it might finally slow down. And then the phone buzzed again. Of course it did. And of course, I picked it up. Here's the written content for the message came in just after noon. Mom and Ryan were flying in that night and I needed to put together a dinner. She didn't ask. She never really did. It was phrased like an update, but the meaning was clear. We're coming. Make it nice. I stared at the screen for a second longer than usual, thinking maybe if I didn't reply it wouldn't happen. But that thought didn't last. I was already opening my grocery app and checking my fridge before my fingers even typed out okay. Half of me didn't know why I still tried so hard. The other half knew it had just become habit. By the time I got to the store, the sun was slipping behind gray clouds. I pushed my cart through the crowded aisles, mentally checking off everything I needed. Mom liked arugula, but only if it came in a certain brand. Ryan was trying some new diet again, which meant avoiding carbs, but still expecting full flavor. I tossed in a bottle of red wine mid-priced, hoping it would seem fancy enough without wrecking my budget. My phone buzzed again as I stood in line. Ryan wanted to know if I had time to pick up his dry cleaning. I ignored it. Not because I was angry, but because I honestly didn't have the energy to pretend I was fine with the request. I got home just before 5 and didn't bother changing out of my work clothes. The kitchen felt colder than usual. I set the groceries down and pulled out pans like it was any other shift. First the chicken, then the salad, then dessert. My playlist was on, but I barely heard it. Just noise to fill the spaces where silence used to sting. I wiped the counters 3 times. I lit a candle in the hallway. I vacuumed even though no one would notice. No one texted to ask if I needed help. I moved through it all like a machine timing everything so it would finish right before they walked in. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because if I didn't, it would still fall on me, just with added judgment. At least this way, I got to control the narrative. At least this way, no one could say I was careless. The oven beeped and I took the chicken out basting it like I had all the time in the world. My eyes were heavy. My feet ached from double shifts. Still, I arranged the table with linen napkins and the ceramic plates Mom gave me 2 Christmases ago. She said they were too plain for her style, but perfect for mine. I looked around at the finished room. It was warm, glowing even. The salad was chilled, the bread still soft, the wine breathing quietly on the counter. I checked the mirror in the hallway and pushed my hair behind my ears. No one would notice, but I noticed. Then I sat down just for a minute, not because I was done, but because I knew this was the only moment I'd get to be still before the performance began. Here is the written content for part 2.2. You forgot the dessert word count. 600. The door swung open with a gust of cold air and voices too loud for the space. My mother stepped in first, wrapped in a camel coat, followed by Ryan, dragging 2 suitcases and already talking about how the airline lost one of his bags. No one looked at the table. No one noticed the candlelight or the food still warm on the stove. Mom gave the dining setup a quick glance and made a small sound in her throat. Not quite approval, not quite complaint. She walked over to the chicken, poked it with the back of a spoon, then reached for the salad and frowned. Didn't you remember Ryan doesn't eat croutons anymore? It wasn't a question. It wasn't cruel either. Just matter of fact in that way she mastered, like her words never carried weight even when they sank me. Ryan chimed in about how the wine was a bit dry, and the playlist was kind of sad, and where was dessert anyway? I opened my mouth to explain, but stopped myself. It didn't matter. Whatever I said would just sound like an excuse. I hadn't forgotten the dessert. I had run out of time, but they wouldn't care about that part. The three of us sat down and we ate in that strange way families sometimes do where everyone's together, but no one's really there. They talked mostly to each other. Ryan about a new internship that might lead somewhere, Mom about a woman she met at the airport who complimented her scarf. I chewed slowly, kept my hands folded when I wasn't using them, nodded where it made sense. When dinner was over, they stood up like a timer had gone off. Mom wandered into the living room with her glass of wine. Ryan followed her, already pulling out his phone. Neither of them said thank you. No one offered to help clear the plates. I stayed behind and gathered the dishes one by one. The candle had burned low, and the room smelled faintly of roasted herbs and disappointment. I moved on autopilot, scraping plates into the trash, loading the dishwasher, wiping down surfaces that didn't need cleaning just to keep moving. The last thing I picked up was a stemless wine glass. There was a crack I hadn't seen thin along the base. As I turned it in my hand, it split clean across the edge and a sharp corner dragged across my palm. I barely reacted. Just watched the blood bead and roll toward my wrist. The sting felt clearer than the entire evening. Not sharp, just real. I stepped back and let the sink run cold, held my hand under it until the bleeding slowed. I didn't call out, didn't wrap it right away, just stood there watching the red swirl into the drain, like it belonged there. From the living room, I heard Mom say something about the guest room window being drafty. Ryan laughed about how I still lived like a college student. I dried my hand, found a bandage, and pressed it on slowly. Then I turned off the kitchen light and walked upstairs without saying a word. Here is the written content for part 3. The truck didn't see me. Word count, 700. The sky was still dark when I stepped outside. Cold air slipped under my coat collar and settled against the back of my neck like ice. The streetlights flickered in that uneven way they always did before dawn, and the sidewalks were slick with leftover rain. I pulled my scarf tighter and kept my head down. The city moved slow at that hour, like it hadn't fully woken up yet. Just a few buses, early trucks, the quiet rumble of traffic rolling past intersections that still blinked yellow. My hands were numb even inside my gloves. My feet dragged a little more with every block. I remember thinking I'd be home in 5 minutes if I didn't stop for coffee. I almost did. There was a cart parked by the corner with steam rising in thin white ribbons. But I just wanted to lie down. I crossed Broad Street without checking both sides. I don't know why. I've played it back in my head 100 times, and it's always the same. 1 second I was walking. The next there was a flash of headlights from the left. Then everything turned white. The sound came next, tires screeching, a horn so loud it cracked the air, metal folding into something that wasn't supposed to bend. My body hit the ground before my brain caught up. I don't remember the impact, just the weight. Heavy and sudden and endless. Voices started shouting far away at first. Someone said they'd called 911. Someone else screamed for help. I tried to move to lift my arm, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. My chest burned, something warm was dripping across my temple into my eye, and then I stopped feeling anything at all. When I opened my eyes again, everything was too bright. Blinding white light above me, shadows moving fast, hands pressing against my body. I heard a voice say female, mid to late 20s, blunt trauma, likely internal bleeding. Another voice gasped, "I know her. That's Nurse Carter." The gurney rocked under me as it sped through double doors. I heard the beeping of monitors, sharp and rhythmic like a ticking clock. I couldn't slow down. Someone yelled for vitals. Someone else said my name. "Emily, stay with us. Can you hear me?" I wanted to respond. I really did. But my mouth wouldn't open. My eyes rolled back before I could focus. A mask went over my face. I felt it barely, like pressure from underwater. They kept talking, a blur of orders and panic. "Prep the OR, call trauma surgery, notify ICU." Then came the rush of painkillers or maybe just adrenaline giving up. My limbs went cold, my heartbeat slowed. And that was it. Everything slipped away like a pulled curtain, the sound, the faces, the light. I fell backward into silence. Here is the written content for part 4.1. She's strong, she'll be fine, word count 600. The trauma bay smelled like antiseptic and iron. Blood stained the sheets, the gurney rails, even the floor where her head had rested for a second too long. Dr. Patel stood over Emily's body, hand on her chest, trying to keep pace with the rhythm on the monitor. A nurse handed him her intake chart, the name printed in bold. He read it twice. Emily Carter. He looked up and his voice cracked. "I know her. She's one of ours." ICU was already preparing a bed by the time Dr. Alden stepped in to make the call. He had made 100 of these before, most of them to strangers. But this one felt heavier. He stepped outside into the hallway, stared at the number for a moment, then dialed. It rang 4 times. A woman's voice answered, light, tired, distracted. "Hello, this is Marianne Carter. Who's calling?" Dr. Alden introduced himself and said the words carefully. "Your daughter Emily has been in a serious accident. She's in a medically induced coma. We need a family member on site immediately to authorize treatment and provide support." There was silence, not shock, not horror, just silence. Then a soft sigh. "I'm on my way to brunch." Could this wait? I already have plans with my son. He blinked, thinking he had heard wrong. "Ma'am, this is critical. Emily is not conscious. She may have internal bleeding. We need you here." The woman exhaled again, annoyed. "She's a nurse. She's strong. I'm sure she'll bounce back. Just keep me updated if anything changes." "I really can't cancel today." Dr. Alden lowered the phone slowly. For a second, he didn't move. He turned to the nurse beside him, who had been listening to every word. Her face was pale with fury. "She's not coming," he said. "Not now. Maybe not at all." The nurse didn't answer. She just turned and walked back to the ICU. Inside, the machines kept humming, steady and cold. Emily lay there, face-bruised, tubes running from every limb. Her coworkers passed by the window in quiet disbelief. One of the interns whispered that her mom was probably flying in right now. No one wanted to correct her. In the corner of the room, Rebecca sat down and placed her hand on Emily's arm. She didn't speak. She just stayed there, breathing slowly, trying to anchor the moment. Outside the glass, someone muttered, "How could a mother not come?" Another replied, "Maybe she never really saw her." In that small room, under the buzz of fluorescent lights, Emily drifted between life and nothing. And not a single person from her family stood by the door. Here is the written content for part 4.2, The Person Who Stayed, word count, 600. Rebecca showed up the next morning just after sunrise, still in her scrubs from the night shift. Her eyes were puffy, but she brought coffee for the ICU nurses in a small paper bag folded twice at the top. Inside it was a travel-sized bottle of lavender lotion, a soft pair of socks, and a keychain shaped like a butterfly. She set the bag on the counter by Emily's bed and gently placed the socks over the rail. She whispered something while tucking a strand of hair behind Emily's ear, even though no one else could hear the words. The machines beeped steadily beside them, a sound that somehow felt both comforting and cruel. No one asked her to stay. She just kept coming back. Between shifts, after hours, on breaks that should have been used for naps or food, she sat in the same chair beside the bed, her fingers lightly brushing Emily's hand like she was tracing something fragile back to life. She talked sometimes about things Emily had missed. Updates from the nurse's station, a new guy who fainted in triage, one of the cafeteria ladies who finally retired. Nothing important, but still something. Just enough to fill the space that had gone too quiet. Other times she just sat there, quiet, still, just breathing. She was the one who pulled the blanket up when it slipped. She was the one who turned Emily's photo on the side table upright when it fell. She even wiped the condensation off the window, so Emily could still have light on her face. It wasn't dramatic. There were no big speeches, no tears spilling on cue, just presence, just warmth. The other nurses noticed. One of them left fresh flowers by the window. Another brought a fuzzy throw blanket from the family closet and laid it across Emily's legs. No one asked if it was allowed. No one wanted to question kindness. On the third day, when Emily's fingers twitched ever so slightly, it was Rebecca who noticed. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just leaned closer and said softly, "If you can hear me, you're not alone. Not anymore." The doctors came and went. Her vitals held steady. Her swelling began to ease, but still, no family called. No one checked in. No voice from her childhood appeared at the door. Just Rebecca, still in the same chair, still whispering little things, still believing. And in that quiet, sterile room filled with machines and blinking lights, it became clear that sometimes the ones who stay are not the ones who share your blood. They're the ones who choose you. When no one else does. Here's the written content for part 5.1, The Lie from Seattle. Word count 600. By the fifth day, Rebecca started asking questions out loud. She waited until the hallway was quiet and the shift had turned over before pulling up Emily's emergency contact sheet again. The only names listed were Marianne Carter and Ryan Carter, both flagged as notified. But something didn't sit right. She remembered Emily once mentioning her dad lived in Seattle, but when the hospital tried calling, there was no answer. The file didn't list his number, just a faded mailing address and a note about parental separation. Rebecca stood outside the ICU and stared at the line that read, "Father unknown location." That didn't make sense. Emily always said he checked in regularly, sent postcards, called when he could. A man like that wouldn't ignore a call saying his daughter might not wake up. She dug a little deeper, called HR, asked if any contact details had ever been updated privately. They had none. Then she reached out to the admin clerk on her old floor, someone who owed her a favor. The clerk found an old intake form from Emily's orientation day tucked in a back file with a second phone number scribbled on the edge. It had a Washington area code, but when Rebecca called, it didn't go to voicemail. A woman answered, polite but guarded. Rebecca asked for Robert Carter. The woman paused, then said he wasn't in Seattle anymore. He was working remotely now, based in Chicago. Rebecca's chest tightened. She asked if Robert had mentioned anything about his daughter being hospitalized. The woman said no. In fact, she thought he was waiting to see Emily soon, maybe around the holidays. She said he was still sending postcards. Rebecca's voice faltered. She thanked the woman, hung up, and stared at her phone. He didn't know. He had no idea. Her hand trembled slightly as she sat down in the hallway. All this time, Emily's mother had told the hospital he was abroad, told staff there was no need to call him, and no one had questioned it because why would they? She was listed as next of kin, but she had never planned to tell him. She had kept him out on purpose. Rebecca stood up slowly and looked through the ICU glass. Emily still hadn't opened her eyes. Her chest rose and fell with the help of a machine. And the one person who might have dropped everything to be there hadn't even been given the chance. The truth sat heavy in her gut. It wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate. It was cruel. She looked at Emily again and whispered under her breath, "You deserve better. Let's find him." Here's the written content for part 5.2, The Living Room Confession Word. Count 600. The house looked the same from the outside, white siding with chipped paint, a porch light that flickered every few seconds. Emily stood across the street hood, up breath fogging in the cold air. The neighborhood was quiet, but her chest thudded so loud she was sure someone could hear it. She crossed the street and walked around the back keys, still on the same ring she hadn't used in months. The door clicked open with a soft scrape. The smell hit her first. Fabric softener perfume, something sweet baking in the oven. It almost made her turn around. She moved quietly through the kitchen steps, practiced avoiding the floorboards that creaked. Voices drifted in from the living room, low at first, familiar. Her mother, and another voice she hadn't heard in years, deeper, slower, Joseph. She stayed in the hallway, heart caught in her throat. You need to be more careful, her mother said. If Robert finds out it's over, he won't, Joseph replied. He never asks questions. There was a pause. Then her mother spoke again, quieter now. Emily still thinks he's in Seattle. I told the hospital not to call. I had to. If he came back too soon, everything would unravel. Joseph's voice was sharp. And Ryan, you think he suspects anything? Her mother let out a bitter laugh. Ryan is too busy being adored to wonder who fathered him. He still thinks Robert's his dad. Emily didn't move, didn't breathe. Her entire body went numb. The next words came slow, like her mother had practiced them 100 times. Robert is Emily's father, but not Ryan's. I never told either of them, and I never planned to. Glass clinked. Someone poured wine. The air felt too thick to swallow. Joseph's voice softened. You never told me that part? I thought you said I lied, she interrupted. Robert stayed for Emily. He always favored her, even when I tried to shift things. He saw through me, but not enough to walk away. Emily backed up slowly, hand trembling against the wall. Her lungs wouldn't feel right. The warmth of the house pressed in like a cage. She turned and walked out the back door, closing it without sound. On the street, the night felt colder than before. The truth wrapped around her neck like a scarf made of stone. She didn't cry, not yet, but something inside her cracked deep and final. Everything she believed about her family had just changed, and she didn't know who she was angry with more, her mother for lying, or herself for never questioning it sooner. Here is the written content for Part 6, Proof and Courage. Word count 800. Emily sat on the edge of Rebecca's couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the TV humming quietly in the background. It was late, nearly midnight, but she couldn't sleep. Her hands rested on a manila folder filled with things she had never meant to collect. Proof, evidence, truth she hadn't asked for but could no longer ignore. The audio file sat on her phone, backed up twice. Her mother's voice, calm and calculating, filled the room whenever she pressed play. Every word was sharp and undeniable. The emails had taken longer. Rebecca had helped her comb through old accounts, archived threads between her mother and Joseph. They were all there, hidden under vague subject lines and second inboxes, but they were real. The last piece was the hardest. A strand of Ryan's hair had fallen onto the bathroom counter days before. She remembered pausing before picking it up, wondering if this was really the kind of story she wanted to chase. But she'd picked it up anyway. Her father's DNA had come from an old card he mailed a few months back, sealed with a faint trace of saliva on the envelope. Rebecca knew someone at a private lab. Discreet? Fast? The results came in 2 days later. She didn't cry when she read them, just sat very still, the paper clutched in her lap. Probability of biological relationships, 0%. It wasn't surprising. It just confirmed the ache she'd carried for years. Now she held all 3 pieces in one folder. It felt heavier than it should have. She pulled out a sheet of paper, the good kind, from a drawer and stared at the blank space in front of her. Then she started writing. Dad, I don't know how to begin this without breaking your heart, so I'll just start with the truth. She wrote for an hour, stopping only to breathe or wipe her eyes when the ink blurred slightly. She told him everything, about the accident, the coma, how no one came, how she had waited for his call hoping he somehow knew, then how she learned he hadn't been told at all. She told him about the night she returned to the house and what she heard behind the living room wall. She told him what she'd found, what she'd tested, what she now knew without a doubt. And then she told him the only thing that mattered, that she still loved him, that he had always been her father no matter what biology said or didn't say, that she needed him to read it all before he decided what to believe. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on top of the documents. She added a small flash drive with the audio file and photos of the emails. She sealed the envelope and pressed the flap down slowly, like closing a chapter with her own hand. Rebecca stood nearby, quiet, her keys in one hand and a jacket in the other. They didn't speak as they walked to the corner mailbox, just moved in, step under the yellow streetlights. Emily slid the envelope into the overnight slot, the metal door closing with a soft clang. It felt final, necessary, like she had done the only thing she could. Rebecca reached out and squeezed her arm. Emily looked at her and nodded. Now he knows. Now at least she had given the truth a way to reach him. Here is the written content for Part 7, The Reckoning Word. Count 700. Robert stood at the edge of the driveway, his coat still damp from the flight, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. The house looked smaller than he remembered, like something had shrunk inside it. He rang the bell once and waited. The door opened before the second ring. Marianne stared at him, startled, her mouth opening just enough to speak, but no words came. She stepped back. The wine in her glass tilted slightly as she moved. "What are you doing here? I thought you were still in Chicago." He walked past her into the living room. Ryan sat on the couch with his phone, barely glancing up. Robert placed the envelope on the coffee table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He didn't sit. "I got Emily's letter," he said. Then his voice cracked. "I read every word." The silence in the room shifted, thickened. "You lied to me," he said, looking at Marianne. "You told the hospital I was unreachable. You told them I was abroad. My daughter nearly died and I had no idea." She took a breath, but he cut her off. "Not only that, you lied for years. You knew the truth about Ryan. You let me raise a child that wasn't mine while convincing Emily she wasn't worth noticing." Ryan stood now, eyes wide, holding his phone like a shield. "What is he talking about?" Robert turned to him softer now. "You're not my son, Ryan. I'm sorry. I didn't know until 3 days ago." Ryan looked at Marianne, confused. She said nothing. Robert shook his head slowly. "But this isn't about blood. This is about betrayal. About the fact that when Emily needed you both, you stayed silent." Marianne reached for him, but he stepped back. "I don't want explanations. I want accountability. I want peace." She opened her mouth again. "I was trying to protect what we built. You didn't protect anything," he said. "You destroyed it. You made me believe I had a family while you carved it out from under me. And when my daughter was lying in a hospital bed, you decided she wasn't worth a call." Ryan sat back down, stunned, staring at the floor. Robert pulled a set of documents from his bag. "I already filed the papers. My lawyer will be in touch. The house stays with you." "I don't want it. I don't want any of this." Marianne's voice cracked. "You can't just walk away." He met her eyes. "I already did." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. If Emily needs anything, I'll be there. She's the only one who told the truth, and from now on, she's the only family I'll answer to." The door closed behind him with a final click. The wind outside had picked up, leaves scattered down the sidewalk. Robert didn't look back. He just walked into the cold and didn't stop. Here's the written content for Part 8, The New Apartment Word, Count 500. The apartment in Queens wasn't big, but it felt like breathing for the first time in weeks. It had old wood floors, tall windows that let in soft afternoon light, and a small balcony that overlooked a row of trees still clinging to their leaves. Emily stood in the middle of the living room with a box in her arms and didn't feel like she was intruding. Robert had cleared a space on the bookshelf just for her. He called it hers before she even unpacked. She filled it with a few paperbacks, a candle, and a framed photo of them at Coney Island when she was little. They didn't talk much that first day, just moved quietly between boxes, making space where there hadn't been any before. Robert made soup in a pot that looked older than she was. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, and he waited until she took the first bite before eating his. He kept the TV low. No news, just a quiet jazz station humming through the speakers. When she coughed, he brought her water without asking. When she looked tired, he handed her a blanket without a word. She hadn't known silence could feel this safe. At night, she sat on the couch while he scribbled notes in a legal pad. "Work stuff," he said. He turned down a promotion last week. Said the title didn't matter. Said being here did. He hung up string lights on the balcony after dinner, called her outside to see. They weren't fancy, but they made the whole place glow. Emily leaned against the railing, feeling the chill on her cheeks. Her dad stood beside her, hands in his pockets, staring out at the skyline like it was a new city. She glanced over at him, then back at the lights. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was holding everything together. She didn't feel invisible. She just felt home. Here is the written content for Part 9, A Christmas That Felt Real Word, Count 500. Snow was falling slow and steady outside the window, soft flakes catching in the string lights Robert had hung along the balcony. Inside the apartment smelled like cinnamon roasted vegetables and something sweet Rebecca had brought in a foil-covered pan. The table was full, not just with food, but with people who showed up by choice. Rebecca laughed as she retold the story of a patient who tried to flirt while getting stitches. Daniel rolled his eyes and passed her the wine. Liz from the third floor brought handmade ornaments and placed one in Emily's palm with a quiet smile. No one asked for perfection. No one asked her to fix anything. Robert sat at the head of the table with a sweater. He said Emily picked out even though she hadn't. He said the sleeves were too long but wore it anyway. He passed around a plate of almond cookies like it was the most important thing he'd done all year. In the corner of the room, a small stack of mail sat in a woven basket. Emily reached in and pulled out an envelope with her name on it, written in the careful script she recognized too well. She stared at it for a long time. There was no return address, no message on the back, just a name and silence. She stood, walked to the kitchen, and without a word dropped the envelope into the trash. No pause, no explanation. When she turned back, no one asked. Robert looked up from the table and gave a small nod, then lifted his glass and said it was time for a toast. To real family, he said. The kind you build, the kind that stays. Emily raised her glass and met every eye around the table. The warmth in the room wasn't just from the oven or the lights. It came from laughter, from steady hands, from the quiet presence of people who didn't disappear when things got hard. Later that night, she stepped out onto the balcony alone, wrapped in a blanket, watching snow gather on the railing. Inside, someone was playing music. Soft, familiar. Rebecca was humming along. Emily leaned against the doorframe and closed her eyes. She wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. She wasn't hoping for someone to notice her. She was home, and this time it felt like hers.